Good evening. It's my pleasure to welcome you all, distinguished guests, faculty, staff, alumni, and students, to the Impeachment Managers Speak, Representatives Raskin and Plaskett in Conversation. As the semester comes to a close, as we begin to reflect on all that's going on, both in and outside of our community, we have a tremendous opportunity tonight to engage in what I know will be a fruitful dialogue. We're delighted to host this informative conversation about the second impeachment trial of former President Donald Trump, thanks to the collaborative work of our program on law and government, the Washington College of Law Student Bar Association, American University's College Democrats, and the Kennedy Political Union. I want to extend my gratitude to Professors Angela Davis and Steve Wormiel for coordinating this exciting event. As you all know, WCL is a place where we celebrate the accomplishments of our peers and our colleagues. No matter how big or small the endeavor, and this one was a pretty big one, we are proud when our folks from our community do noteworthy things as they did here. Speaking of noteworthy, we're pleased to have two distinguished members of our law school community who were lead prosecutors of the second impeachment trial join us tonight. It was a full circle moment when one of our former colleagues, Jamie Raskin, and former students, Stacey Plaskett, became the lead managers of Trump's second impeachment hearing. Representatives Raskin and Plaskett presented an efficient, well-organized, and comprehensive case against the former president and achieved what we know is the most bipartisan vote on impeachment in our nation's history. Please join me in welcoming Maryland Congressman and WCL Professor of Law Emeritus, Jamie Raskin. For those of you who do not know, Congressman Raskin previously taught constitutional law in the legislative process for more than 25 years here at the Washington College of Law. He's also the founding director of our Law and Government program and our Marshall Brennan program. Congresswoman and AUWCL alum Stacey Plaskett made history by becoming the first non-voting delegate to serve as an impeachment trial manager. She's also the recipient of this year's Hairston Alumni Award from the Sylvania Woods event for her extraordinary contributions to the legal profession and social justice through activism, leadership and diversity and equality, support and mentorship to colleagues, students, and other members of the community. A warm welcome back to both of you, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be with us here this evening. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our students who will begin the questions.
I just want to give Alexis a moment to unmute her camera because I do see she's here.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Ainsley, for giving me a second. I want to first start by thanking you all for being here this evening and taking the time to speak with us and answer our questions as it relates to the impeachment proceedings. And with that being said, I want to start with a question. Just why did you all decide to proceed with the second impeachment? What were some of the challenges you all faced? What were the discussions that you all had that were like that inevitably led you to that decision? Thank you.
Well, let me take a shot at that one. I should thank you, Alexis, and Professor Dinnerstein and Professor Davis, and all of our friends at WCL. I want to thank all of the different groups involved, and I appreciate the fact that it is a coalition collaboration effort there, so we don't have to come back 6 or 7 times. I'm already doing the commencement address, and you guys are going to get sick of me soon enough. So thank you for all getting together. And I'm so psyched to be here with Stacey Plaskett. It's a special treat for me to be able to be here with Stacey since she was my student. She was a prized pupil of mine back in the day, and we have stayed so close over so many years. And this was really, a crowning, defining moment for our friendship, being able to work on this together. So I'm psyched to be back at WCL, where I first got to meet her. Look, why did we go forward? I'll just speak for myself. We had no choice but to go forward. For one thing, this was the most serious and massive presidential crime against the Union in American history. And even if it were not to have any effect on Donald Trump and the short term, we absolutely needed to establish for the remaining future of our republic, and let's hope that that's indefinite and infinite, but for the remaining future of our republic, that the president cannot mobilize violence against the Congress of the United States during the counting of electoral college votes in order to overthrow a presidential election result. So that's just basic broken windows hypothesis. I mean, you don't want to let this kind of thing go. You don't want to allow the creation of what we were calling a January exception, so that presidents could try to incite insurrections or coups on the way out the door, or not, as the case may be. But I would say more specifically with respect to Trump, we were not just horrified, but we were terrified about what had just taken place on January 6th, with this massive violence, with people getting killed, with this effort to violently coerce the Vice President of the United States to participate in the nullification of electoral college votes from Georgia and Arizona and Pennsylvania, which would have denied Biden a majority in the Electoral College, kicking the whole thing into a so-called contingent election under the 12th Amendment, where the House would have voted, but not one member, one vote, one state, one vote. And Trump would have won that. He had already shown he was willing to do anything in order to stay in office. So, first they had tried to go to the Republican-controlled legislatures to get them to obviate the popular votes and just appoint electors for Trump. Then they went to people like Secretary of State Raffensperger in Georgia and tried to coerce them, intimidate them into committing election fraud by concocting and manufacturing ballots. I think it was 10,989 ballots. That was all that Donald Trump was asking him for in that phone call. And then finally, inciting a violent attack against Congress, against the counting of electors, against the vice president, in order to install himself. So we didn't think it was over. There were 2 weeks left to go, but nobody thought that he was just going to let it go at that point, especially with having come so close. So we needed to impeach, and in my case, I felt we needed to try to appeal to the vice president to activate the provisions of the 25th Amendment as well, in order to stop any further degradation of our politics and any further attacks, violent or nonviolent, on the election result. And so we wanted to have that kind of deterrent effect on short-term actions against the union as well.
Yeah, I think, we have moved, well, first, let me say it's great to be here with you all. And thank you. This is a wonderful turnout to have a reflective discussion about a process that has happened very few times in our country's history. And I'm always grateful for any time that I can spend with Jamie Raskin, to hear from him, to learn from him, and to have these kinds of discussions. I think now we see time moves so quickly in America now that we've forgotten how dire many of us thought that moment was. Not just the insurrection itself, but as Professor Raskin said, the potential for other activity to take place by the president. And we also have to recall that, but for potentially the individual who was the majority leader of the Senate, we may have had an impeachment trial much sooner than we did. President Trump may have still been in office if the majority of the Senate were being run by the Democrats rather than the president before an inauguration. Recently, I read the book Lincoln on the Verge, which discusses that tremendous length of time that used to occur between a president's election and a president's inauguration, which has been shortened now. But many of us were really concerned with the damage that could further be done to our democracy, and felt in this instance there was no other course of action that the Congress could do, and that we actually had an absolute duty in upholding our own oath to put forward an article of impeachment and to potentially go to a trial of the president. But as we'll, I'm sure, discuss further, that of course, and a potential non-conviction does have the chilling effect of creating a diminution of the power of impeachment and trial on American democracy.
Thank you so much. And Representative Plaskett, on the same topic of what you just mentioned, of feeling like you had no other option,
Mhm.
we're seeing recently a growing political divide in the country that is likely to make it near impossible for a sitting president to be impeached. So what avenues do the both of you see remaining as effective checks on the office of the president and those presidential powers?
So you mean, it seems almost unlikely that a president will be removed from office or convicted, right?
Right.
But let's recall that, but for President Nixon resigning, he would probably have been convicted, right? He left office and resigned, thereby halting the need for moving forward with the process. So there are instances that was a very polarized time in our country as well. I think what makes it more difficult here is not the polarization, not the tribalization, but the not so great majority that either party have in the chambers. You know, we are split so evenly, and we have become so political that we do not rise above our party politics in many instances, but fall in line as in party politics. Listen, you know, outside of impeachment, let's look at September 11th, the vote to go to war. One member of Congress voted against that, and that was Barbara Lee. And when we look at other instances, the members who voted from the Republican Party to impeach the president have a great deal of difficulty within their own party now to step outside of the box there. And I'm sure, you know, there will be issues that the senators who did vote to convict the president will face in their own reelection should they decide to run for reelection. I think it's not that we are so polarized. I think it's that we are so evenly split in that polarization that makes impeachment so difficult. What do you think, Jamie?
Well, I want to go back to your first point, Stacey, which I really agree with. First of all, it's very important for people to remember Donald Trump was impeached by the House, not once, but twice. He was tried by the Senate, and he wasn't convicted. He beat the constitutional spread, the 2/3 requirement, which is 67. But still, as I think Dean Dinerstein said, it was the most bipartisan impeachment conviction vote in the Senate in American history. You know, there was just the Andrew Johnson case, there was the Bill Clinton case, then there's Trump 1 and Trump 2. And we had 57 votes to convict, 57 to 43. So I would say, and here, you know, maybe I show my stripes as an impeachment manager, but I would say that we established as a constitutional fact in the House and the Senate by resounding majorities that the president did commit the high crime and misdemeanor of inciting violent insurrection against the Union to overthrow the 2020 election. I think that has made Donald Trump a pariah in terms of national political culture in America, even though he does maintain a stranglehold over the Republican Party, which is behaving much less like a modern political party and much more like a religious cult of personality these days. So, you know, people have said, well, you know, maybe impeachment doesn't work anymore. And, you know, I think it's probably fair to say that the framers understated the extent to which we would become riven by political party, as Stacey was saying, by partisanship. I mean, Madison in Federalist 10 thought that we would come to identify with our branches of government. You know, House members would be House members and senators would be Senate identified and so on. And this was the perfect controlled experiment for that, because the president essentially unleashed an army of violent neo-fascist, racist insurrectionists against us in our own chambers trashing the place, rifling through people's desks, ripping stuff off of the walls, killing people, chanting, hang Mike Pence, setting up a gallows and all that. And yet still, there were 43 senators who identified not narrowly parochially with the Senate and their own safety and the safety of their staff members and colleagues, or even with the legislative branch or the Constitution of the country, but they identified with their political party. And even there, I would say, as partisanship goes, it's a pretty cheap and degraded form of partisanship when the guy that you're showing your partisan loyalty to had been a liberal Democrat at one point, a right-wing Republican, Reform Party, independent, all over the map. Even before the trial, he was talking about creating a new party called the Patriots Party, named after the Patriots, who were descending upon the Capitol. So I don't even know if it's fair to blame it on partisanship. I mean, that's a whole different kind of pathology where you go with one guy, and I hope not to sound overly partisan myself, but that's just a new derangement in our politics.
And I do feel that, Jamie, when if you have conversations, or in the conversations I had with several of the senators, there is it is not a loyalty to the party that kept them from voting against it, but a fear of that base group that supported the president. And fear that they would in fact lose power by doing that. I have this crazy theory, and I don't know if it's based in anything except my own poker speculation, that at the very beginning of the trial, well, of course, first Mitch McConnell gave himself a potential out by waiting for this to occur after the president is out of office, to give himself a constitutional out, which is what he used. But I believed at the very beginning that he very much wanted to convict the president. But I think what was more important to him was maintaining his position as the leader of his caucus. And he would have to have a majority of members, not just the 17, but a majority of members vote to convict to be able to do that. And once he did his own vote count of those within his group, and recognizing that he was not going to be able to get a majority of them to vote in favor of conviction, kind of let it fall to the wayside at that point, because there's no way he could vote to convict, or even have the president removed from office by a vote of 2/3 and then a majority, and remain the head of the Republican Party. That could not be. What do you think of that theory?
Well, I've always agreed with that. I mean, Stacey was Congresswoman Plaskett was the first one to come to me and say, hey, some of these Republicans who are coming to talk to us, we should allow them to know that they could vote to convict if they feel that we have sustained, beyond any doubt at all, which we certainly did, because there was no refutation, our burden of proving that the president had committed incitement. But then they could still say, but they don't think it's a removable crime, or, and because there would be a separate vote on that. And all we needed at that point was a majority, because that's a majority vote, not a 2/3 majority vote. So that was something that we definitely used. I mean, the other thing I was telling the Republicans who came to see us over in our war room right off of the Senate floor, we had a room, what was that, Stacey, 218? Was that I remember? What I would tell them is, look, this is something that you've got to do, having sworn an oath to render impartial justice, and also your oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. You got to do it for the country and the Constitution. But you know what? You also have to do it for your party, too, because I really believe that Donald Trump will destroy the Republican Party before it's all over, because all that matters to him is maintaining his own power. And I agree with Congressman Plaskett on this. I think McConnell understood that. I think if the votes had been there, if there'd been a majority in the caucus to convict, he would have voted to convict. I mean, they left this very thin jurisdictional hook out there that, he couldn't be tried after leaving office, which was just absurd. I mean, we demonstrated more than 2 centuries of precedent contradicting that point. And it totally cuts against the text of the Constitution. If anything, and this was actually argued in the very first Trump impeachment trial, if anything, it's more likely that the Constitution favors impeaching people after they leave office. They were arguing in Trump 1, you can't do it while he's still in office because it would interrupt his tenure. But that's wrong too. But in any event, they made exactly the opposite argument the first time around.
Hi, my name is Amrita Chetty. I'm the director of the Kennedy Political Union, and I first just want to thank you both so much for taking the time to be here today. My question is along the same division. As it was previously mentioned, this impeachment was incredibly bipartisan, not dissimilar to the first impeachment of President Trump and the impeachment of President Clinton. Do you think that there is a future for the use of impeachment that is nonpartisan? And if not, do you see impeachment losing its value?
Well, let me just say about it, nothing in politics is nonpartisan. I mean, one of the things I was first thinking about doing when we got over there was to introduce a motion to change the seating arrangements, because the senators were seated with the Democrats on this side and the Republicans on that side. Well, that's not how juries sit, right? Juries don't sit according to political party when they're trying to figure out the facts of a case. But it was suggested to me that this would be seen as provocative. The senators would not want to remove all their stuff. And, I guess the insurrectionists had already been rifling through their things and they were a little tender about their seats and their desks and so on. But that to me is symbolic of the fact that it's hard to abstract from the partisanship. But let me say this. Real life politicians know how to be nonpartisan when we want to be. And think about constituent work. If you come to my office or Congresswoman Plaskett's office, you got a problem with the Social Security check, you got a problem getting VA benefits, Medicare, PPP, whatever it is, we don't ask you whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or independent or green or libertarian. We just go to work for you. If you live in our district, we will go fight for you. That's it. I don't think, maybe Jim Jordan does it differently. I'd even be surprised there. I mean, but who knows? But
you had to get that in, huh? You had to.
Yeah, so I was trying to think of the extreme case, but so we know how to be nonpartisan. And then, this is how we try to think of it when we do a public policy issue. I mean, we're talking about gun safety, right? Should there be universal background check on violent criminals accessing firearms? Well, when we're looking at the public policy question, we are not trying to make society safe for Democrats or for Republicans. We're trying to make it safe for everybody. And that's true for equal pay for equal work. It's true for infrastructure. We're not out to just make life good for people who are in our political party. So we know how to deal with that. What's inextricably partisan about impeachment is that politicians will consider what are the electoral ramifications and implications of different things. And impeachment, conviction, removal obviously have that. But I think what we can legitimately ask for is what I call constitutional patriotism. And I won't go into too much depth because that's what my little spiel is about for your commencement for any 3Ls out there. But constitutional patriotism is the idea that we do demonstrate a patriotic devotion to the Constitution and the rule of law above our political party or above our cult, whatever it is. We're not a country that's unified by being one race, one ethnicity, one political party, one religion, one system of belief, but we've got one Constitution, one rule of law, one set of constitutional values and principles, and that we need constitutional patriots to stand up for, because it can get trampled by the violence and by the partisanship.
Yeah, I think that our country moves in cycles, and the impeachments, there are some similarities and some real differences. I think in reviewing the factors that led to impeachment and the political environment, Trump impeachment 1.0 is very similar to the Andrew Johnson impeachment. And I think that, that is a much more polarized political impeachment scenario in those instances. I keep pointing out the Richard Nixon potential impeachment because in that instance, individuals in the Republican Party exerted their constitutional patriotism, right? There at the Judiciary Committee during the hearings, there were Republicans who broke down crying, recognizing that they were going to have to vote against the president and did so, and moving the articles of impeachment out of the Judiciary Committee because they recognized that the actions of the president at that time way surpassed any allegiance to a party, and they had a duty to the Constitution. I think now that we're in a different cycle again, and that's not to say that we won't come back to that place that created an environment where members of Congress, maybe not in this generation, but the next, would think very similarly. I believe right now, post-Trump, that we are in a post-cold civil war here in this country. We are in very much, in my mind, in a civil war of ideology in this country, and that President Biden has a mandate of reconstructing the union in the same way that President Lincoln did after the Civil War that, this country, the tremendous loss of life and property, et cetera, that happened after the physical Civil War, that we are now in a cold Civil War reconstruction period right now.
Hello, my name is Emily Minster, and I'm the Deputy Director of Programming for American University's Chapter of College Democrats. And I want to say thank you so much again for taking the time to be with us today. So our question goes in a bit of a different direction. While the second impeachment didn't end in conviction, all the impeachment managers certainly had very moving speeches that could have swayed most juries. So we would like to know how the Senate—
Thank you, Emily.
I really appreciated everything both of you had to say. So we were wondering how the Senate impeachment trial could be used to target media coverage and political discussions to essentially convict a president in the court of public opinion, even if the Senate acquits the president, and how we've seen this play out given the partisanship of media currently.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it did. It was always interesting to me while we were conducting the trial itself, if I was in the members of the impeachment trial team, along with some of the key staff, would be in this war room, and we had two TVs going. One was on one cable news station, which is a more liberal one, and the other was on a right conservative station at the same time. And it was often amusing to see that, the right pro-Trump one sometimes would not even have the trial on at all. They would move to issues that were just mundane, regional, feel-good stuff that was happening in the country while the trial of a president was going on. And so, but we recognize that not only are we speaking to the media, not only are we speaking to the American people and to the world, but we're putting something in the record as well. This is as long as the Republic survives, and even thereafter, there will be a record of the exact facts and evidence, of the persuasive arguments, the legal arguments that were utilized by this brilliant team to be able to not only convict in the public's eye the president, but also to persuade individuals about legal precedents moving forward. We spent an entire day just dealing with constitutional issues and motion practice in some ways before we went to the actual fact-finding evidence in chief of our direct case. And so all of that information will always be there and will be utilized, I believe, later on. by scholars as well as potentially other politicians and political parties in what a president should and should not do, and what authority and outcomes members of Congress have and do not have, right? You know, the founders were terribly worried about a despot. They were completely concerned with having a president who would be like the president after George Washington. They knew that there was not going to be another George Washington. They knew what they had been through before. And so there had to be some guardrails that were created to contain power. And while the president may not have been convicted, I think that it contains the power of what a next president thinks that he can and cannot get away with. Do you have anything to add to that, Jamie? No.
I mean, I don't think that I do. Yeah, I think Stacey pretty much said it all there. I guess I would say that, you know, not only did we have an extraordinarily compelling presentation, it was rooted in a remarkable constellation of facts that we had assembled in painstaking fashion, both in terms of the telling of a story by the impeachment managers and by the video that we compiled. This is an irrefutable and certainly unrefuted historical record. And meantime, we may or may not have been the best impeachment team in American history, but I would certainly argue that for my team. We certainly saw the worst presidential impeachment team of lawyers in American history on the other side. And a lot of it was because they had no case. And I don't know what their directions were other than to get up and stall. But they didn't refute any of the facts that we offered. They didn't provide an alibi for the president. And their constitutional arguments were just demolished on a daily basis by all of the impeachment managers. So they were left with nothing on the other side. So yes, I agree with the question. I think that we have firmly established this in the court of public opinion and in the court of history. And it's important too, because we didn't get to 2/3, and Donald Trump and Roger Stone and Steve Bannon and Dinesh D'Souza and the whole gang of the pardoned criminals are down there in Mar-a-Lago plotting the restoration of Donald Trump to power. And they've got despots and dictators and bullies and tyrants all over the earth who Donald Trump made deals with, who are rooting for and working for his restoration, because it really could be the end of our country next time as we know it. It could be the end of American democracy. We were able to survive just barely 4 years, even though we lost hundreds of thousands of people to COVID-19 because of the lethal recklessness of Donald Trump. And we were on the edge of becoming a banana republic on January 6th, but we survived it. And we're coming back strong in Congress, even with these razor thin majorities that we have. But if we were to lose it again, does anybody think that Donald Trump would ever willingly leave office next time? And does anybody think we ever really could recover from what would happen to us again? So, you know, as much as Congressman Plaskett and I and the other managers would like to think that we were going to deliver a knockout punch to that kind of right-wing authoritarian politics, we didn't. We are still in the fight of our lives right now. And, you know, everybody out there today is an impeachment manager. Everybody out there is fighting for democracy because we are not remotely out of the woods yet.
We see it, Jamie, all the time on the floor. If you all of you as students are watching the debates that are occurring on the House floor right now, you can see this, the tenor and even the rhetoric that is being put forward and being pushed back on is very similar to what was allowed, we believe, during the Trump presidency that led us to the January 6th. You know, I have sat on the floor and waiting my turn, you know, an example, waiting my turn to talk about a bill that is budget related to, you know, education or whatever, and hear a colleague right before me make, have comments about, Black Lives Matter or Black people or others that are so incendiary and, in my mind, against American values and what I believe we are as a country in terms of our ability to be diverse and to be respectful of each other, that I can no longer talk about what I wanted to and have to address that. Because if we continue to allow a lot of this rhetoric to stay in place and remain, again, on the record, that creates a platform, I believe, for others to do the same.
And a final point on that, the whitewash on their side of the aisle has already begun about what happened on January 6th. I mean, Donald Trump is out there saying that his supporters entered the building hugging and kissing the Capitol officers. Tell that to the 140 of them who ended up in the hospital, and the ones with brain damage, and the officer who lost fingers, the officer who got his eye gouged out. But this is now just a common alibi that you hear on Fox News and among our colleagues. We have Republican colleagues who said stuff like, well, I knew we were going to be fine. Now, if we had been taken over by Black Lives Matter, I would have been really worried.
So thank you both so much. Congressman Raskin, you said you didn't want to say that you were the best impeachment team in history. I will say it, you were the best. And it was not just that you presented such an amazing case and in working to save our democracy. It was a great lesson to students in lawyering, great preparation, and your presentations were so persuasive and you were such great advocates. So thank you so much for that. We are at a time when we can take questions from our audience. So if you have a question, this is a great opportunity to ask questions of both Representative Plaskett and Raskin. So if you have a question, please go to the Q&A section and type your question there. And I will attempt to ask the questions. We already have 2 questions, so I'll get started. One of them, if you think you can answer this, one question is, what are your thoughts on criminal prosecution of Trump? What charges? Likelihood of success? U.S. attorney or special prosecutor?
Well, Stacey Plaskett is the real prosecutor on the team, so let's go to her.
Yes, criminal prosecution. I believe that the charges depend on the jurisdiction. I'm not a fan of special prosecutors because I think special prosecutors are political prosecutors in many instances. I mean, I worked with Robert Mueller at the Justice Department and always saw him as someone who was above politics. And, the attempt to make him political, I think, is what hurt his report as well. In New York, I think that there are real charges that the former president is going to be facing related to tax issues. Jamie, of course, led what I believed at the time that he was president, a great argument with regard to the emoluments clause. And so individuals who have standing to that, I think, would have been amazing. In the District of Columbia, simple mayhem and rioting charges, I think, are real. And then we have the old criminal election tampering that other jurisdictions are looking at as well. I think that those are, very interesting. And why not? What is the other part of it that says judges or prosecutors? Okay, so in addition to justice, he'd be barred from future elections. So we'll see.
So let me say something about that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one thing on criminal prosecution, don't forget about the direct intimidation and solicitation of state election officials like Raffensperger in Georgia to commit election fraud. When he says, all I'm looking for is 10,190 votes, find me the votes, that is an attempt to get a public official to commit election fraud. And, the fact that it was taped sometimes throws people off. Donald Trump, it was like a one-man crime wave. And when he does stuff in public, sometimes people think, well, that can't be a crime because he just did it so blatantly. Like, when he says, Russia, if you're listening, find us those 30,000 emails. Just because you do it in public doesn't mean it's not a crime, So that's one thing. Another is there are civil cases that are out there. We have colleagues who have brought very compelling, interesting cases under the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871, which bans interference with Congress executing its duties. We were delayed by 5 hours or more in our central duty of counting electoral college votes, and that was the entire purpose of the demonstration, to stop the steal and to shut down the members of Congress in the performance of our public office. So that's there. But here's the other thing about him holding office that was raised. Check out Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which was adopted also after the Civil War during the Reconstruction period. And when that text first came out of the House, it was far broader. And what it said was anybody who committed insurrection or rebellion against the Union couldn't vote. So it was like a mass disenfranchisement scheme if you participate in insurrection or rebellion against the Union. When it got to the Senate, which was the more conservative body, they cut back on what the radical Republicans in the House were saying. And they said, look, let's just take the worst people, the people who actually were holding office under the federal government, who swore an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, but sold out the Constitution, betrayed their oath of office, and participated in insurrection and rebellion. Even those people we won't disenfranchise permanently, but we'll say they can never hold office again. And who's in that bullseye core of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment? But Donald Trump, a guy who swore to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, violated his oath of office, participated clearly in insurrection and rebellion against the Union. And so, totally apart from impeachment and conviction, this is apart from that, he should be banned. Now, theoretically, it could be self-executing. I think that Congress needs to state that this was an insurrection and that Donald J. Trump participated in it. I mean, in a certain sense, we've already said that in the joint, in the impeachment by the House and the conviction by 57 senators, the vote to convict by 57 senators. But we're not finished with that yet. So I think that the 14th Amendment, Section 3, and we did talk about it at a few different times in the trial, sets up a separate bar to his ever holding office again.
So here's a question about the 25th Amendment. Did you think it was more like, the question is, did you think it was more likely for the 25th Amendment to have been invoked by Mike Pence or for Donald Trump to have been convicted in the Senate? And I guess I want to add something to that question. I began to think like the 25th Amendment must be meaningless. Like if it weren't able to be invoked during Trump's administration, when could it be? So what about that?
Well, I started putting in a bill. It was actually the very first bill I introduced when I got elected to Congress, because I got elected the same night as Donald Trump. So I introduced it back in 2017 to set up the body that's called for in the 25th Amendment, because it says, people understand the first part of the Section 4, which says the vice president and a majority of the cabinet can determine that the president is incapable of executing the powers and duties of office, and can transfer the powers to the vice president. Or it says the vice president and a majority of a body set up by Congress can determine the president is incapable of executing the powers and duties of office. Congress never set that body up. And so I was trying for years to get us to set the body up. I think Speaker Pelosi finally came around to it, but it was too late. It was a few months before all of this happened. So when it did happen, I said, look, we can try impeachment, but there's going to be so many ways to hold that up. Why don't we first at least try to appeal to Vice President Pence to do the right thing? As Stacey was saying, we were really afraid of what this guy could do. I mean, the 25th Amendment was put in the nuclear age because they knew you got 535 members of Congress, and if a couple of them go off their rocker, you can handle it, but you got one president and one nuclear button, and one power of war. So that's a real problem if that person gets increasingly deranged and divorced from reality. So we did appeal to Pence to do it. He came back that Tuesday and said he wasn't going to. We voted to appeal to him to do it nonetheless, and he refused to act. And then we said, okay, we're forced to move to impeach the president and remove and convict. But I think there was a certain logical sequencing to it. I mean, the 25th Amendment obviously was designed as a nonpartisan thing. If you've got a president who just can't live up to his or her office, you try to get everybody together to say, let's get through the crisis.
Now may be the time to set up such a body, right? While you do not have the fear or there isn't this belief that we have a president who may have that. I mean, people will try and politicize it. Are we saying that our president is incompetent or whatever? But maybe how it could be, put is that, listen, we've seen what has happened in the past, and we want to have this body in place should it be needed for any vice president or any president holding office.
So I'm going to combine two questions here that are somewhat related. One of them is, do you think Trump would have been convicted if the vote had been anonymous?
Yes.
Okay, and then I'm going to ask this second question, which I think is somewhat related. And the question is, and I'll just read it verbatim, on a personal level, how do you deal with not being devastated by the Republican senators' refusal to even consider the facts, and so much of the country's trivializing or denying the facts, even though they are supported by videos citizens can witness with their own ears and eyes? If this didn't warrant conviction or at least true consideration by the Republican senators, what would? And then it ends, P.S. This is not intended as a rhetorical question. How do you deal? I mean, I guess it's sort of like, how do you go on?
Well,
because some of us were losing our minds around this, but yet you all maintained and you represent us, so professionally and with such dignity. And
that's how we act in public.
Well, look, I think it's a great question. I was pretty crestfallen when the votes came in. I really thought that, especially after Richard Burr from North Carolina and Cassidy from Louisiana, because they did it alphabetically. So we had a B vote to convict, a C vote to convict, neither of which anybody was contemplating. So I thought, here goes, we've got a cascade effect, and it didn't happen. It didn't take me long to be buffed up by Stacey Plaskett and by, Joaquin and some of the other members who said, look, we've got to look at what we did as a huge breakthrough to get that many Republican votes. And I think that was the right way of thinking about it, that we kind of pierced the armor. I mean, we got 7 Republican votes from New England, the Mid-Atlantic, the South, the Midwest, the West, Alaska, from all over the country. And there's 17 of them, if you put the House and the Senate together. That is a beachhead against the cultish authoritarianism there. Obviously, it's a minority, but they got to deal with Liz Cheney, and they've got to deal with some pretty forceful figures on that side who aren't going away. So, that good act is not wasted. But I guess in the broader sense, my feeling is that, this is, like Jefferson said, this is a game about principles. Principles are at stake, so it's not like, you lose this one battle or inning and you just go home and, you bring your mitt and the bat and the ball and you say, I'm not playing anymore. You get right back on the next day, the way every member of our team has, and you start fighting for COVID-19 relief, $1.9 trillion that we did American Rescue Act, show people the government can work as an instrument of the public interest, an instrument of the common good. Do it for infrastructure, do it for gun safety, and then go back right out there and fight to win in 2022. We are bucking all the historical trends. All the trends are that the incumbent White House party loses in the midterm election. And our friends in the GOP control a lot more of the means of gerrymandering and redistricting than we do. but we are still determined to go out and defend our majorities and expand our majorities. And, you know, one of the things I loved about the trial was that none of us were really famous before we got out there, but now we have new leaders who are in the public eye who can go out and stand strong for democracy. And I can't even tell you how proud I am of Stacey Plaskett, who doesn't even get the right to vote on the floor of the House. And we made her the first non-voting delegate to be on an impeachment manager team. And she's going to be like one of the top Democratic leaders, fundraisers, organizers in the country now.
Oh my goodness. It's good to have
Thank you so much. We have I agree, 5 minutes left, and I know we have to end at 7. I would like if the two of you would just give a word of advice to the students out there, a word of encouragement as we close. And as you're thinking about that, I just want to say again, how very grateful we all are to the two of you. You make us at the Washington College of Law and American University, you made us and continue to make us so very proud. We're so proud to have you be members of our community. Representative Plaskett as our esteemed alumna, Representative Raskin as our Professor Emeritus. It is just, we're so proud of you and we're so very grateful to you for today, which was just magnificent, for what you did during the impeachment and what you continue to do every day. So a word for our students and then we'll close out.
So I'll go first so Jamie can wax eloquent and close us out and be a professor to all of you in his closing. But my advice to you all is to take risk and be willing to not accept the confines or limitations on what is possible in your careers. I think that's, and also look to support and allies to people who you might not traditionally think of as someone who could be a mentor or an ally. You know, I've spoken with a lot of people of color about the fact that some of my greatest supporters and breaks have come from white men. And they have been great support to me throughout my time as an attorney. And to be willing to, you know, continue to believe in this democracy. When you asked if it's not devastating, it is devastating. And I have to admit that, you know, Jamie is a gentleman and a much better person than me, but there are Republicans that I won't speak to anymore. There are people I won't even ride in an elevator with anymore because I don't want to share space with individuals who say some of the things that they do. But through that devastation, it also makes me, you know, I'm originally from Brooklyn, it makes me want to fight and fight like hell to keep this republic. And that's, I think, the overriding feeling that I get after having gone through the fire and this battle of impeachment, is to ensure that there's a place that these amazing students that come out of Washington College of Law and young people around the country have a space and have a country that they can call their own.
Well, let's see, I guess I want to leave you with 3 points, okay? One is an answer to something that Stacey just said, because she thinks I'm always so well-behaved and everything. But I got to tell you a story. I'm not sure I've told you this, Stacey, about Ted Cruz, because after the impeachment trial was over, we had recessed for a week. We were away, and then we all came back. But during that time away, that's when there was that sequence of terrible events in Texas, where the people were just so hard hit, and it was just a demolishing event for people. But Ted Cruz, you remember, decided this was a good time to make a grand escape to Cancun. And he was somebody that got under my skin a lot, because he, like Rand Paul, refused to look at the video monitors. So we would put up Donald Trump exhorting the crowd to go and fight like hell, or you're not going to have a country anymore, and you're not going to take back your government with weakness and so on. And then the pictures of our Capitol officers getting clubbed with American flags and Confederate battle flags and Trump flags and, punched and gouged and all that stuff. And they refused to look at the evidence. They made a point of just, pretending that they were writing something down. And I can't even tell you how mad that made me. So when we got back, Speaker Pelosi had asked us to go out on the front steps of the Capitol to have a moment of silence for the more than 500,000 people we lost in COVID-19. I don't know if you were there that day, Stacey. And so we were out there, and then it broke up. And afterwards, who do I see come bounding up to me but Ted Cruz, who I'd never met before. And he and this was after his week of shame with this whole thing. And he said, I think he used my first name. He said, Jamie, I just want to tell you, we disagree on a lot, but I think you guys did a great job. It was a brilliant performance and blah, blah, blah. And, Harvard this and Harvard that. And you know what words came out of my mouth? Stacey Plaskett's going to appreciate this. I said, nice tan. I said, nice tan. And so I'm not always so polite and well behaved.
I'm so proud of you.
Yeah, I know. She'd be proud of me for that. So I want to say, make sure you pursue your careers with equal parts of reason and passion, and master the law and master all the rules, like the great Stacey Plaskett. Nail it down so it's part of you. But then get up. And then you show your emotion. I mean, that's what I told the managers. I said, are you kidding? They just invaded our house, like, to get up and pretend like there's no emotion in it. So when they asked me what was driving us, I said, there's a lot of passion here. And underneath that passion is anger about what they've done to the Congress and to the country and the Constitution. But underneath that anger is a lot of love for America and what it's done for our families and what it's done for our people over the centuries and the decades. It's giving us the space to fight like hell for what's just and what's free. So I guess what I would like to say to all of the great young people out there is find your path in the law. One of the great things about WCL is you're encouraged to go and find your own path. There's not one robotic way of doing things. And work with your professors, as Stacey worked with me. I encouraged her really strongly from first year law school to go and be a criminal prosecutor. I thought she'd be magnificent, and who knew that we would get to work together in this way. But so go find your own path and stay close to your professors, stay close to your students. It's a wonderful community, and I think both of us hold it very close to our hearts.
Thank you both so much. I want to thank all the students for your wonderful questions. I want to thank everyone from our special events office, Janice Richards, Tess Sapper, Ryan, all the folks from our AV department for putting this together. And I want to thank especially, of course, Representatives Plaskett and Raskin, and also thank all of you for joining us this evening for this wonderful event. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Angela Davis. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.